Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons and Fortnite, and how Fortnite structures its game lore in the same way that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition structures its game lore. Okay, so like almost every single household in America that has a junior high age boy, there is a ton of Fortnite being played in my house. Now, actually, one thing that's nice about video games in our house is one of the things with the Garibays is with media, all media. You are not allowed to use any screen in the Garibay household privately. No one. There's no exceptions to this, right? So whatever our kids are playing, there's no point where our kids go to their bedroom, close the door, and spend 4 hours on a computer or on a television or whatever. I don't understand why any parent in the world does that. It's a terrible model. It breaks parenting. It's just terrible, right? If you're a parent, do not allow screens in anyone's bedroom. It's just a horrible, horrible model, right? So basically, when there are video games that are being played by our kids, they're played in pure view public of the entire family, right? Which really helps, because if there's crazy stuff that shouldn't be in their video games, it becomes apparent very, very quickly, right? So with Fortnite, I actually really, really enjoy watching my son play Fortnite, right? Junior high age son, and he plays a lot of Fortnite, and plays it on the big screen. He sits on the couch. The rest of us sit on chairs in our living room, and Fortnite game is just going on. And he might have, and usually he has the headphones in, and and we watch him, and I could see, and I love that game because you can see, what's happening as far as how low on the, there's 100 people go in, who comes out the winner, and my son will routinely come out between 5 and 15, right? So and every now and then he'll spike as low as 2. I don't know if he's ever won a game, but he does pretty good. And so I'm watching this, and we discuss the game every now and then, and whatever my kids are really into, I really try to understand it and get a grasp on it and understand what's happening with it. And one of the things with Fortnite is, I've been watching it for a long time. I felt I had a pretty good understanding, and I said, Logan, your game really doesn't have any lore. And he's like, well, the story game has some lore, but nobody cares about it. Nobody plays it, right? Because really most of the action happens in the battle royales, so forth, right? And I'm like, okay, I got you. And so at that point, you got this situation where, I'm looking at it, and I'm really, and more, I look at the game, and Fortnite has really said lore doesn't matter. Play style and freedom and the ability to do anything we want in the game matters way more than lore, right? And so that's what happens, right? They're just, they throw anything they want in that game. There's a point where they threw Thanos into Fortnite for 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And the build, the way the characters build makes no sense, right? It's super cool, right? But it makes absolutely no logical sense, right? And also the cartoonish illustrations of the game absolutely make no sense. And every single game of Fortnite is this horrible free-for-all where everybody dies except one person. That should be horrific, but it's done in this way where it's cartoonish and laughable and almost winsome, right? And so Fortnite is really a strange game, right? But the more I thought about it, I really believe that Fortnite got its lore structure from Dungeons & Dragons 5th E lore structure. So let's talk about that, right? So once I kind of accused my junior high son of playing this game that had no lore, I really, I had to look at the mote in my own eye, right? And I was like, what is the situation with D&D lore, right? And if you look at D&D lore carefully, you're going to see some massive, massive problems, right? So I'm not going to bury the lead. I'll tell you what I learned, right? So here's the thing. With D&D, the official lore that is created by Wizards of the Coast, that's been created by the official company that owns D&D, all along, it's a veneer, right? And the actual, the creator lore is the gold content. So basically, the lore that has been written by professional writers who were paid by the company that owned D&D That's the secondhand content. That's the dollar store content, right? It's useful, but it's not valuable, right? But the content that is absolutely precious, right? The lore that really matters to Dungeons & Dragons is the creator lore, the lore that has been created by the game masters, by the dungeon masters and the players, right? And that lore is distributed across millions of players, millions, right? Since its beginning, there have been literally millions of Dungeons & Dragons players, and that lore is distributed across them. Now, one of the problems with that is, the greatest pieces of Dungeons & Dragons lore are not known to almost anybody. So, like, just take Ed Greenwood, right? Like, he's written for Forgotten Realms, and he really did a good job, like writing Forgotten Realms. It took Faerun to the highest heights of any of the D&D lore, probably. It's the most organized, it's the most narrative, it's the most cohesive of all the lore, most likely. It's debatable. There might be another setting that's a little bit more, in there. But the best thing Ed Greenwood wrote is nothing compared to 100 different examples of lore examples that only like 5 players know. You know what I mean? Because it was in their games, and it happened in one of their games at one of their tables, and they will there will be people who will discuss those lore points at somebody's funeral. Like, that's how epic they are. They span generations, they span lives, and that's the valuable, pure gold content. That is the lore content of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, in my opinion, right, every single day that passes, I have a growing appreciation of the genius and the wisdom of Mike Mearls. Mike Mearls is the only one who ever identified the problem of settings in Dungeons & Dragons to the level that he has discovered. I think some, like in 4th edition, people were starting to get hints that D&D lore had huge gaping problems, right? Just big problems. But specifically Mike Mearls, he really he went at it. Like he attacked this problem directly. And so I'm just going to give you a few facts, right, that might shock you. It shocked me when I figured it out. I had some clues that this was the case, but when I learned the full extent of it, I was like, holy cows. There are 22 official Dungeons & Dragons lore settings. 22 official Dungeons & Dragons lore settings. And that does not count all the craziness that third-party creators created during the 3E, anybody can write whatever they want in our world section. That does not even count that, right? So, it is staggering how many, how many lore settings there are. It's just incredible. 22 different ones. And that doesn't even count all the stuff that happened during the 3E, 3.5, 3.5 edition craziness. So it is incredible how much is out there. I'll just list, here's some of them. Eberron, Faerun, Ravenloft, Greyhawk, Spelljammer, Planescape, Blackmoor, Mystara, Pelennor, Dragonlance, Karator, Darksun, Alkadim, Thunderrift, Jackandor, Rokugan, Dragonfist, Mahasarpa, Ghostwalk, Nentir Vale, and Aberinis. Okay? Now, that is 22 official, right? Some of those I had never even heard of. Dragonfist and Thunderrift, I didn't even know they existed, right? And I've been studying this game since 1982, right? It's crazy how many settings are out there, right? Now get this blew my mind too. The last official Dungeons & Dragons setting came in 2007, 11 years ago, right? And it was Nentir Vale, and Nentir Vale was the official setting of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, right? And so basically, not one new setting has been created in 5th edition. It's the only Dungeons & Dragons edition ever that the designer said, absolutely no new settings will be built into this game. Not one, right? And I think that was because Mike Mearls goes, holy cows, we have 22 settings. We're not servicing those settings nearly enough, right? And also there's a massive disparity between the quality of these settings and the support they received. And in addition to that, we have a problem, and this is true, right? So there's these pure junk settings that are in Dungeons and Dragons. A few of those 22 are they're just not good, right? One of the themes that happened with Dungeons and Dragons settings is like five different designers said, you know what's cool? Japan's cool. Let's do a Dungeons and Dragons game that just has a lot of samurai swords. Like it's just, are you kidding? Like we needed 4 or 5 of these? Like there are just huge gaping problems, right? Every one of those guys was right. There are, Japan is awesome. Just don't do 5 distinct different settings based on, with major elements coming straight from Japan. Like it's, and then there's entire cultures that never got any, like it's just, it's really bad. So Dungeons & Dragons lore, there are a lot of problems with this. And I think if you look very carefully, you will see that Mike Mearls has nailed this on the head. He's like, I am putting a ban, and I don't think I'm not sure he ever said this to anyone. He's just executed it, right? Mike Mearls has not allowed a single new setting to be built under Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Not one. And that is the only setting that has ever done that. Not one Dungeons & Dragons edition. That's the only edition. Not one Dungeons & Dragons edition has never allowed a single setting to be built underneath its umbrella. Not one. So that's something Mearls has done that no other designer has ever done in the history of the game, right? And I think it was the absolute right thing to do, right? Because one other problem that Dungeons & Dragons has, right, is they have some of these just pure pure junk settings. Not all of them. I think, a vast majority of them are really cool. A lot of neat things in those things, but some of these are just should not ever get any more time or attention from anyone, right? But because Dungeons & Dragons is the way it is, and because its lore is so precious, and because single thing that is official from Dungeons & Dragons, like Dungeons & Dragons gets rubbed on certain things at certain times. And when Dungeons & Dragons is rubbed on a thing, like you get this situation where you're like, oh, I get that, so here, we've Dungeons & Dragons has put its official stamp on this. It now has value because the Dungeons & Dragons name has so much value, right? So one of the things, a perfect example of this is like Thunder Rift and Dragon Fist, right? They're really, there shouldn't really be any more content created for these. These should be left in the past, right? But what happens is, Dungeons & Dragons staff gets cheeky and they're like, you know what? Here's some Spelljammer in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, right? Spelljammer, like, in my opinion, really should not be, nobody should be encouraging new Spelljammer content, right? And here we have the GIF, which is going to blow up. The GIF's probably the coolest thing that came out of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, right? And you have this situation where you're like, holy cows, what's going on, And it really is. It's just alarming to look at what's happening here. It's just alarming to see what is occurring, right? And so you have this situation, where D&D gets cheeky, and then they pull out this setting that has tons of problems that makes no sense. Like hippopotamuses with blunderbusses is really fun, but it's really problematic from a perspective of, hey, people are trying to take the game serious here. What does this mean? Like, if this is official, and if the GIF are getting shine from the current D&D staff, then, oh, you know what? I can hold out hope. Thunder Rift, man, that's going to be a new 5e setting. It's coming, man. And all the cool things I love from Thunder Rift are going to come out. And so when they get cheeky and they give like these super weird, wonky settings, some love, it lets everybody who ever loved any one of those 22 settings, think that there's going to be like really good full support for some of these settings, and you're just like, oh man, no, man, like this is not a thing, right? Like you just really can't do this, right? And so there's just a lot of there's a lot of dissonance in D&D settings overall. And so the reality is, it's the same thing. We have another situation where the truth of Dungeons & Dragons is so nuanced and so complicated that the vast majority of people will never get it, right? And so one of the things you keep hearing is you're like, hey, dude, I want my new, Mike Merles, get that Dark Sun setting book out there. And if you notice, there's not a single setting book that's been made in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Not one, right? There's no Dark Sun 5e book. There's no Ravenloft 5e book. And I understand Curse of Strahd is an adventure. It does not give you what you need to adventure in Ravenloft. It's not a Ravenloft book, right? And Merles has said there's not even going to be setting books within 5th edition. He has not said it with his words. He said it with his actions, right? And so Merles understands very, very carefully. He has a full understanding that the actual pure gold content, the golden lore of Dungeons & Dragons, is distributed across millions of players, across generations, across families, across nations, right? So how do you manage that, right? Well, it might be unmanageable, right? And so with Dungeons & Dragons, you have this really unusual thing with this lore. And I think the creators of Fortnite understood this, and that's why Fortnite is structured the way it is. It is structured in a way where the lore is going to be distributed among the players, right? And so, example, this is, my son, early on, he was running, and he was just getting sniped by some person, and he put his back to a cleft, and I watched this whole thing, and he just hid, and then the storm came, and he turned, and he killed the dude that had been sniping him, right? Like, that had been, shooting him in the back for a while, and this was early on when he had no ability to really fight, and we were just like, what? And the two of us will remember that moment for a long time, you know what I mean? And and so the lore for Fortnite is not actually whatever happens in that weird zombie storyline, but what happens with the players. So it's a very nuanced, very different perspective. But the gold content, the actual meaningful, useful, valuable lore, does not exist in Eberron or Forgotten Realms or Dark Sun or Planescape or any of those hot ticket lore settings. It exists at tables. It exists in spiral bound notebooks. It exists in minds across the world. Take care.